So thank you guys for being here. And I know we're a little late, so I will try to go quickly through this panel because I can see some people are getting a little antsy. But Shilpa, it'd be great if you could kind of just start off and give an overview of what is actually ESG and why have so many organizations really started to incorporate this as a strategy?
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having us today. So in terms of ESG, I'm sure it started with corporate social responsibility or social responsibility. That was a term that was originally used around risk management and brand reputation. And then it eventually moved to sustainability, which was a larger term, and the term that I got for an intro. Come in. Louder? I'll show. And so from corporate CSR, corporate social responsibility and social responsibility, which was around reputation management, we moved to sustainability, which then started to bring in the science, the environmental piece. And the term that I continue to use, you'll still hear sustainability and now even their ESG. When investors came into play and there were investor relations, that's when we started to hear ESG, environmental social governance. And that was really really built around the idea of having a way to measure performance on each of these aspects that they felt created sustainability. I don't like to use the term in the ESG because it's very siloed, and sustainability recognizes that we need to think in a systems perspective because these issues that fit under ESG are complex and they're interconnected. So when we look at climate just from an environment perspective, we miss the diversity or the inclusion aspect of it because most impacts of climate change are impacted significantly by indigenous and marginalized communities. And with that, connection has only recently arisen, and I think that's partly to do with the fact we have a tendency to think silo as opposed to systems. And I would like to see the world move toward systems and away from silos. And when the companies start to embrace ESG more in a much more real way, when we've in the last 2-3 years we've been hearing a lot more about ESG. That really is tied with investor relations and investor interest, which would then get the board to start asking about it. They would ask board of directors, and board of directors would then ask their C-suite, and would then ask their management. And that's where we started seeing people get a little more interested in what was ESG. And try to show. And such an interesting concept, right? That it's driven at the strategic level from investors that care about it. So now we're seeing that across the organization. And I'm sure, Michelle, you're seeing that pressure in your role as well. And I'm sure there's been challenges in your role as well in terms of, bringing in ESG and implementing it into your organization. Could you maybe share some of the maybe challenges that you've had with bringing in ESG into your organization?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the first piece to say is, there are so many things that you can do in your organization to start to address ESG. And I know at Staples, it's really been a 20-year journey for us. I mean, there's so many things that we do from an environmental standpoint in terms of our own operations, in terms of interaction with our customers, and also interaction with partners. And then we get to the social side where we've focused on our diversity, equity, inclusion. We've created business resource groups. We've done so many things to bring the people side into it. And then from a governance standpoint, we wrap that all around how does it get built into our organization? How do we use our ISO certifications, our quality management systems, our environmental management systems to oversee it and pull it together and help guide us? But I would say from a challenge standpoint, you have all these pieces. And how do you get them to connect together? And that is the challenge. And I think the second big challenge is around communication. So when you look into your organizations, you probably see that you have pieces of this happening throughout the organization. And I know the worst thing that I can hear is when one area of our organization says, oh, I didn't know we did that. It's like inside our own organization, we're doing great things towards ESG, but it's in pockets of the organization, and getting the communication to happen so that everyone actually knows how they can contribute to the system, what's going on in the system, is still a big challenge.
I know we were talking earlier about this too. It's just so, maybe not funny, maybe I'll use the word interesting, that it always goes back to change management as the biggest challenge for letting these initiatives across the organization. And Shilpa, kind of to the same question there, do you find, that, change management and those are some of the biggest challenges that organizations face with ESG, or do you find anything beyond that as well?
Most certainly. I think understanding how to change and be agile in relation to sustainability, but also skills. Like, I thought your presentation was interesting when we looked at the various generations of the legacy leaders and onwards, because at the boards are legacy leaders. And right now, sustainability is coming from investors to boards. Most board members did not face these issues. Climate change was not an issue for them, nor was it diversity, equity, inclusion. So now these board members are being asked to address these issues that they have never addressed in a business context. And so I will often have to sit with a board chair, and that moment I'm just astonished that I'm not the board chair, because at the end of the day, I actually know this issue far better and can make decisions around it. And that's why I think when we look at skills, we have to, even at the board level, do we need an ex-CEO to be at a board right now and at the board, when we're looking at ESG, when we're looking at climate change, when they have never addressed it, we might need more diversity in terms of experience at the board level. And so for me, as a sustainability practitioner, I think skills, because also sustainability sits in, right now, at some institutions, it's in human resources. Others, it's illegal. Yeah. Some in marketing. And where sustainability sits is often the lens that the sustainability mill takes. When it sits illegal, it's very risk-oriented, and it's not really focused on opportunities. When it's in human resources, it can also be a risk management, but also employee engagement, but then it's not connecting to product and customer, right, in the same way. So I think with sustainability, it's looking at skills, but understanding that one person will not have that skill. The sustainability team will have a variety of skills, and they are not able to function well if they're put into one department, because they sit on top of they connect all of the organization. So those would be some of the, I think, how we can look at organizations, now they're organized, and the skills we need.
And I love that ties back to what we heard today around the importance of skills, so making sure that we're identifying, like you're saying, the right people to make those informed decisions and do that job. So I completely agree. And Michelle, at the end of the day, an organization needs to make money, right? And they need to make profit. So obviously you want to do all of this great work, but how do we really balance and balance generating profits and generating our business forward with doing initiatives that are, related to ESG? How do organizations, or how does Staples even work to kind of achieve that balance?
Right. I think based on everything we've heard today and everything we know about ESG, it's not really an option anymore. I don't think that you have a difficult time making the case that this is good business practice, that it makes good business sense, and that you have to do it. There's no doubt that it does take time and effort and cost money, but it is the right thing to do for business. And, employees are demanding it. They want to work at a place that has a culture that has ESG embedded in it. From a B2B perspective, certainly our customers are demanding it. When customers are working it into their RFPs, they want to have discussions about it. They want to have metrics. They want to understand what you are doing and how you are going to help customers get better at it themselves. So, everything is pointing into the direction that in order to propel your business forward, you have to embed ESG into the business each and every day. I think the challenges come with finding good metrics. I don't think the problem is with finding stakeholder commitment, because even all of those generations that we talked about know that there's a compelling business reason to do it right. It's the right thing to do from a society perspective. So I think the commitment is there, and now you just have to find the actions and be able to communicate it effectively across the organization to keep things moving forward. And certainly something like COVID slowed us down. So a lot of the grassroots things that we had great momentum in, when all of a sudden everyone is away from the office, it's hard to have a tree planting event where 20 or 30 employees go someplace and plant trees. It's hard to pull people together to have those moments where they're connecting as teams to further the cause. So I think now as we're coming out of the pandemic, we'd have to make some conscious efforts to create the momentum again. And even some of our customer programs that we had in place, employees at customers were participating in our recycling programs. Well, if they're not in the office, they're not participating in the recycling programs. So a lot of good habits that we had built have now fallen apart, and we've got to rebuild them again. So I think coming out of the pandemic, that rebuild is going to be key across the entire organization.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of back to being agile, and how do we now introduce this again? And I think you highlight such a great point. It's not only the right thing to do, but the smart business decision. And again, we heard that throughout, around how CEOs and employees are group for purpose and driving those initiatives forward. And Michelle, you also mentioned the importance of metrics. And maybe I'll pull that on Shilpa. What are some ways that organizations can start to think about how they're actually measuring and showing, whether it's ROI or even SROI as it relates to ESG?
Well, in terms of metrics, it's interesting. So so there's a great deal of sustainability report, and there'll be metrics around the social, which are often around employee engagement, turnover, a little bit around diversity in Canada, gender, male, female, and they're so very binary in terms of how they see gender. But what I find from my experience in corporations, and often also now working as a consultant, is that companies often are driven by the metrics that are given by reporting, like MSCI, these investor relation type metrics. They're not actually thinking about what are the right metrics for our business, right? So if a report, Bloomberg's gender index, says these are the metrics we want. This is what we report on. They'll report on that. Not thinking, does it actually make sense for us to be reporting on this? And these metrics, like ESG reporting, has increased, I think, 100-fold in this tiny time frame. I think it's two years. I don't have the stats. There's a really good stat on how it's increased astronomically over a very short period of time. But the actual change in the world has been almost zero to none, because a lot of this is being driven by metrics that are being given by these frameworks that are investor driven, and companies aren't thinking, but does this make sense for my business? Does this make sense for how I want to move forward in the world with my customers, my employees? So when we think of metrics, there are 100,000 metrics that you could be reporting to, but how you use those metrics is much more important, and ensuring those metrics are right for your business. And when I speak, I used to work at a pension fund, and so when I would sit in conversation, pension funds would often try to say, like, if you can explain why you don't want to use this metric, then that's great. If it doesn't fit in your strategy, that's fine. And then when I would work within a non-pension fund financial institution, they were thinking that way. They were just like, what metrics do I need to, what is my employee engagement and score? Does I need to send it to MSCI? So I will get the score I need to get my shareholders to be happy with me. And so that metric conversation is interesting. I think there's ton, but I think we need to be more thoughtful in what we use.
Yeah, agreed. We get buried in metrics. And I mean, I think Busier mentioned that today with what was it? For every one dashboard, you need 20 work. So we should remember. Okay, for sure. But to that, example, it's so true, right? We get buried in metrics, but really what value is that added to the organization, and how we're lighting back all the strategic objectives that we're trying to achieve, as opposed to just being buried in metrics. I love that example. And then, Rochelle, to that point, as we're thinking about how do we kind of look to show value to stakeholders that are involved within the ESG space, how do we kind of show that the ESG initiatives are driving value and kind of keeping them engaged throughout the process when we're sometimes buried in these metrics that aren't necessarily showing the value that we want them to show?
Yeah, I think that every organization has to find a way to internalize the metrics that it fits with their organization. And you have to find ways that it connects to the values of your associates. If people believe in what you're doing, they're going to get behind the initiatives. I think we've done a lot to try to create grassroots initiatives where the employees are actually taking their values and telling us how it fits with the strategy to say, this is the things that we want to do. So it creates instant value because it's their ideas that are creating team events in the field. Likewise, we still have some top-down initiatives that we're bringing to the fold at the same time that are allowing employees to participate as well. So the value has to be seen by all your stakeholders. It has to be seen by the CEO, by the board, but it has to be seen by the employees. And I think that that's where the magic happens. If they see the value, they're going to participate, they're going to communicate, and the momentum builds.
Exactly. I love that. And as we're kind of talking about companies doing that, Shilpa, do you have any examples of companies that you feel have done this maybe effectively?
Yeah, I think people will disagree or not agree. I think Unilever is always been held up as a really great example when Paul Pullman was there. But Paul Pullman was also, I was reading a business article about him. He was the former CEO of Unilever, and he was really instrumental in the whole sustainable living plan. But he was smart, like his Danone CEO tried to do something similar in France and was let go. But Paul Pullman worked with his board. He had his board buy-in before he started making these changes around sustainability and really pushed it forward. And that is an incredible example of success. But I think if you start to unravel it, you will see the strategy, and the navigating negotiation that had to take place to really bring it to that company and bring it within that company. So that's an example. It's not Canadian, unfortunately. I think in Canada, where I think most of the great work will happen, will be small and medium enterprises. I think large institutions are like the Titanic. It's very difficult for them to really not turn. So that's where I have my hope. I've worked in a few large institutions. I've seen that sometimes the things that don't matter get in the way and become more important than the things that really matter. And perhaps that'll change, and perhaps that's just my experience, but that's what I feel like had.
Yeah, you could have heard that earlier, Tisha, when you were mentioning at your or one of the many organizations you worked with the 14 layers of different hierarchies, and that's kind of what kind of supports that limiting some of those challenges.
Can I just make one comment at this, just to reinforce what you said? What you mentioned is success starts at the CEO. From the CEO, everything can go up to the board and permeate down through the organization. That's success.
Exactly.
You don't have the CEO needs. You're going to be pushing uphill all the time.
Grassroots is important, but I learned that too, working in the grassroots with not-for-profits and then working at the top, that the CEO will set the tone, right? You need the grassroots, but that CEO will allow it to flourish and nurture it, or will squash it.
Exactly.
So that leader is so important.
Exactly. And as we're talking about other leaders with organization, and obviously a ton of HR leaders here, Michelle, what would you maybe give as advice for HR leaders that are trying to influence ESG at their own organizations?
I think that as HR leaders, you have a significant role to play, and you just need to be bold and take that opportunity and push forward the agenda. I mean, we know that it makes strong business sense. We know it's what employees want, and HR's the glue that holds those two things together. So you're in the perfect position to make the connections across the stakeholders, to advocate for the employees, and to add the communication layer. And I think so often it's that communication layer that's missing. So I know at our organization, we, from an operational perspective, we had so many amazing initiatives going on. And then from a grassroots perspective, we have employee groups doing amazing things from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint. And as we're looking through the organization, we could see the silos building where, operations owed everything. We were doing great from a sustainability inside of our operations. HR owned certain pieces in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and metric tracking, but we weren't doing a good job communicating across the organization. And so we actually just had our CHRO take on the role of the ESG lead. And the main piece was so that she could communicate everything that we were doing and put a formal process around it.
I love that. And essentially removing the silos. And then by removing the silos, you create more collaboration, more room for innovation, and more room to drive that purpose innovation forward. So completely love that. And I know we're about to close, but I wanted to ask you guys, if there were 3 things that you think organizations should maybe consider when they're trying to start to push forward an ESG strategy, what would it be? And I'll start with Shilpa.
How we normally start with an ESG strategy is looking at a materiality matrix. So what are material issues that face your company? And what you'll see more and more now, we would never see diversity, equity, inclusion was sort of in the middle. You wouldn't see it as high importance. In the last 2 years, it's shot right up, as has climate change. So once you look at those material issues, that's where you look at your risk and opportunity. And right now, strategies are often focused on risk management and not opportunity realization. So I would start with understanding what are the risks and opportunities, build a strategy, which is about choices. What choices is the company going to make? Based on those choices, what metrics are we going to use to help us understand if those choices are working for us? And then build a communication strategy around it, have an engagement opportunities for employees to engage with employees are vital. I mean, the S piece in ESG has become very, very important, particularly over the last 3 years with the pandemic. So that S piece of employees, pay equity, labor supply chain, all of that, where is that going to sit even on, is within the shot?
I think for me, I would say take a look at what the company business strategy is and find a way to use that as inspiration to where to put your ESG efforts. Because if it fits with strategy, you'll be off to the races. 2, I would say don't try to boil the ocean. Like, just get started. Jump in, get started, push the ball forward, find the advocates, find the people that really want to champion the cause, and connect yourself to them and just give them the voice to run with the initiatives, and good things will happen.
Awesome. And I love that. I think that's a great way to close it. Just get started. Just get started now. Start doing it for your organizations. So please, thank you guys so much for all of this insightful knowledge around ESGs. I hope that was informative to everyone. Really, really great fireside chat.
Huge.